At the highest point of the capital, the Senator's Palace, with its tower built in 1579, is a symbol of Rome's continued presence in history. Castor and Pollux, two magnificent statues, guard the approach to the splendid court and the facades of the palaces designed by Michelangelo. While on the site of the pagan temple of Juno Moneta now stands the Basilica of Santa Maria in Araceli.
Let us go back towards the Roman Forum. This great square was the commercial and legal center of Rome during the Republic. But in Imperial Rome, the first emperors added various new fora alongside it. Centuries and centuries have left their mark in this wondrously rich and precious archaeological site. At the far end of the Forum, towards the Colosseum, rises the Arch of Titus, erected at the end of the 1st century AD.
Alone and tall stands the Pillar of Focus, the last monument to be raised in the Forum by an obscure and bloodthirsty Byzantine usurper in the 17th century AD. Between the Arch of Titus and the Arch of Constantine, a wealth of famous ruins calls to us. The 3 columns of the Temple of the Dioscuri,
and the small, delicate temple of Vesta. And not far off stands the austere edifice of the Curia, the Senate House, one of the most important public buildings in ancient Rome. The street of the Imperial Fora marches impressively to the majestic bulk of the Colosseum, the monument which proclaims Rome to the whole world. It was erected between 72 and 80 AD by the emperors of the Flavian family on the site of the artificial lake created by Nero in the gardens lying beneath his fabulous palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. The grandiose amphitheatre, which could hold approximately 80,000 spectators, was dedicated to cruel and bloody spectacles, such as the fights to the death between gladiators or with men against wild animals, a system often used for public executions of condemned prisoners. However, there are no actual records of religious martyrdom in the arena. Indeed, the only real effective imperial edict seems to have been the one forbidding the sacrifice of Christians in the arena.
The structure of the building is still impressive today from both the architectural and the functional point of view. The 3 harmonious tiers of arches are surmounted by an attic story to which were fixed the supports for the velarium, an enormous canopy which served to protect the spectators from the rain or the burning sun, and was operated by sailors from the fleet at Cape Misenum. And this is the Arch of Constantine, dedicated to the emperor by the Senate and people of Rome to celebrate his victory in the Battle of Ponte Milvio over his rival Maxentius in the year 312. This dedication is carved on the Attic entablature. The arch is considered a veritable anthology of imperial Roman sculpture, since it is decorated with reliefs dating from the time of Trajan up to that of Aurelian, in addition to those sculpted during the reign of Constantine himself. Here again is the Isla Tiberina, the Tiber Island.
Santa Maria in Cosmedin.
But the most well-known item is the Bocca della Verità, the mouth of truth. Who, when visiting Rome, has not put his hand into the mouth with or without trepidation? For legend has it that if a liar does so, his hand will be bitten off.
Among the warm, brick-coloured roofs typical of Rome, the dome of the Pantheon with its concentric circles cannot fail to be noticed. Built by Agrippa, it was totally remodelled in its present circular form at the beginning of the 2nd century by the Emperor Hadrian. The interior of the temple, consecrated as a Christian church dedicated to Santa Maria dei Martiri in 609, is completely dominated by the luminous, perfectly hemispherical coffered dome divided into its 5 levels of concentric lacunas. The building has remained almost intact. Only the bronze roof tiles and the casings of the porch beams have been removed, the latter because the Barberini Pope, Urban VIII, wanted the metal for St. Peter's.
The light streams in through the great ocular, 8.9 meters in diameter, at the apex of the dome, emphasizing the curve of the roof through the play of light and shade in the caissons.
On the rocky core of grey African marble rises an Egyptian obelisk, brought from the nearby Piazza San Marcuto and set up in 1711. In the beautiful Piazza della Rotonda, in front of the precise geometric facade of the Pantheon, we find one of Rome's most breathtaking fountains, designed by Rome's foremost fountaineer, Giacomo della Porta.
Outpost of the Vatican, symbol of power in medieval Rome, the Castle Sant'Angelo in fact dates back to the beginning of the 2nd century AD, when it was built as a mausoleum for the Emperor Hadrian. Today, we know it in its restructured form, initiated by Alessandro Borgia at the beginning of the 15th century, with its heavy central drum pierced by wide panoramic arches and surmounted by the bronze angel made in the 18th century by the Flemish artist Van Verschaffelt. The Renaissance keep rises above the bare circuit walls, which still show signs of the savagery with which the masonry was torn down by the Romans themselves in 1379. The destruction was total. Not a trace of the medieval fortifications remains, but the core of the ancient mausoleum of imperial date was spared, and its structure is still clearly recognizable.
The loggia, giving onto the Tiber, affords a stupendous view. The bridge, with its retinue of angels, sculptured by Bernini and his pupils, draws our eyes towards the old city centre, which has lost nothing of its time-honoured charm.
The beautiful oblong shape of Piazza Navona dates from the end of the 1st century AD, when the Emperor Domiziano built a stadium here capable of holding 30,000 spectators. Some interesting ruins are still visible between the piazza itself and the Piazza di Tor Sanguigna behind it. as well as in the crypt of the Church of St. Agnes. The dynamic facade of this church was built between 1653 and 1657 and is the work of one of the greatest exponents of Baroque architecture, Francesco Borromini.
At the north end of the piazza stands the Fountain of Neptune. At the south end, in the distance, is the Fountain of the Moro, the blackamoor.
The commanding composition in the middle, with its Egyptian obelisk, is another 17th century masterpiece, the Fountain of the Four Rivers, created by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the teacher and later rival of Borromini. The obelisk, which forms its centerpiece, was taken from the Circus of Maxentius on the Appian Way.
The fountain was built in 1651, a few years before the completion of Borromini's facade, so unfortunately there is no truth to the tale that the poses of the two river gods facing the church are meant to express disgust at the work or fear that it may collapse.
In the small Piazza Mattei, a few streets away, we come upon one of the most delightful sights in all Rome, the Fountain of the Tortoises. This enchanting composition was designed by Giacomo della Porta in 1581, and the four graceful youths, each gently pushing a tortoise into the upper basin, were sculpted by Taddeo Landini. And here, in striking contrast, is one of the most famous and theatrical sights in Rome, the Trevi Fountain, almost overwhelming the piazza in which it stands.
Tourists from all over the world crowd the square daily, ready to throw their coins into the vast basin, made famous by the scene in Federico Fellini's masterpiece, La Dolce Vita.
This celebrated monument has a long and animated history. It was originally located in a neighboring street, the Via della Stamperia, and only when Pope Urban VIII commissioned Bernini to build a major fountain was its present site considered.
The death of Urban in 1644 put a stop to the plan, however, and only in 1732, nearly a century later, was work commenced on the construction of this spectacular fountain, based on a new plan by Nicola Salvi. It was finally inaugurated in 1762.
Built against one entire wall of Palazzo Poli, the fountain presents a lively fantasy of mythological and allegorical figures.
Another unfailing attraction for tourists of all nations is the sinuous flight of steps leading from Piazza di Spagna to Trinità dei Monti. Together with the Trevi Fountain, the famous Spanish steps are considered one of the most important architectural triumphs of 18th century Rome. The staircase was designed by Francesco de Sanctis and built between 1723 and 1726. The fountain of the barcaccia, the old barge or leaking boat at the base of the steps, dates from an earlier period. It was sculpted by Pietro Bernini, father of the more famous Gian Lorenzo.
Today, as in the past, the Spanish Steps are a real open-air drawing room. Unfortunately, excessive and often improper use by both locals and tourists caused considerable damage to them. But in 1995, they were carefully cleaned and restored to their former splendour. The pink house on the right of the steps is where the English poet John Keats died at the age of 26.
The immense monument to Vittorio Emanuele II and the unification of Italy, whose white Brescian marble has been criticised by many experts as being out of keeping with the colours of Rome, is shown here not only in its usual daylight version, but also at night with the evocative effects of floodlighting. And now here in close shot, the embracing wing